Welcome. Welcome for those of you who are live. My name is Jamie Harnish. I am a real estate broker with Bosley Real Estate.
And I'm Karen Peterke with Clearview Financial Group.
So we're here to hopefully help educate about how to buy. It could be your first investment property. Maybe it's a second or something like that. But you can always learn something new. There's no question about that. Now, why are the two of us standing here? For me, myself, so I've been fortunate enough to accumulate 4 properties, 7 doors in total, and the rental income, mind you that these are gross numbers, but the rental income has been fairly substantial, which I'm certainly very grateful for. So, long-term rental, bring in about $117,000 a year. And I have one short-term rental property brings in $180,000 a year. We actually had our first full year last year. Mind you, those are gross numbers. So I don't want to, I want to be open about that there are expenses and that kind of stuff. But that can be the power and the leverage of real estate. Karen.
And so I've been in business for about 15 years, and I've also owned some rental properties of myself. For myself, and I'm sitting at 3 rental properties, each with 2 units in it, and a vacation home I use for myself, but occasional Airbnb as well.
And then you have a Florida property as well that you're in the works, right?
Yes, yeah, with my business partner. So that's kind of a new venture we're kind of looking into and doing it kind of in the corporate side. So TBD.
Okay. Now, the agenda for today, we've got a number of things that we want to kind of run through. Why real estate? You're here, and so you might not necessarily need any convincing, but just to kind of drive home why it's such a valuable asset class. What to buy, where to buy, how to buy it. Certainly, Karen's expertise on the financing side of things, how to manage it, and resources. A very common theme that is going to run throughout this entire kind of presentation is asking yourself what makes sense for you from a strategy standpoint, from a property type standpoint, from a geographic location standpoint, because we're going to be going over all kinds of different types of ways that you can get into an investment property. But it's really going to we're really going to try and drive home what is important to you in terms of what you need from that asset. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but have 4 different examples of asset classes. And real estate really is the only one that drives the needle, or moves the needle, I should say, in the different ways that assets can be valuable to you. So from a yield standpoint, from an equity standpoint, being able to leverage the asset, whether it's a hard asset or not, and there being tax advantages as well. Some of them do, some of those hit some of those other points, some better than others. Crypto, no question that equity buildup can be massive in a rapid period of time. And the other thing that I wanted to drive home was that the income that is, the resources that are required, the capital allocation that are required, can be leveraged with real estate. And that's the one thing of those different ways that an asset can be valuable. It's leveraged through real estate that is really a huge, huge advantage. So as an example, let's say you had a portfolio of stocks or a portfolio of cryptocurrency. You wanted to have $100,000 worth of stocks or $100,000 worth of cryptocurrency, you would require $100,000 in cash in order to buy those. Unless you're using margin, there's some kind of tricky stuff there. But, for your typical person, $100,000 gets you $100,000 of the assets. For real estate, $100,000 plus your land transfer tax, I don't want to gloss over that, can get you a $500,000 asset. So that's the power of leverage. And why being able to leverage is so important is because, let's say in all 3 asset classes, you had 15% growth in value. Your stock portfolio would now be worth $115,000. Your cryptocurrency portfolio would be worth $115,000. But the home that you bought, or the property that you bought, is now worth $575,000 because it's the growth on the $500,000 not the growth on what you put into the home. And so your net increase would be $75,000. You bought a house for 500. It's now worth 575. So that's the power of leverage. You get the gain on the total amount, not what you put into it, unlike other types of assets. Anything you wanted to add?
No.
To those things? Just I wanted to make sure.
It's powerful.
Okay. Yes. In terms of what to buy, we're going to talk about strategy types and property types. And these three strategies that we're going to talk about are not the only three. You've got flips. You've got rent to own, which technically could fall maybe between kind of medium and long-term rentals. But there are certainly other strategies outside of this. But these are the three that we're going to focus on. There are pros and cons for both. And the one thing that I want to point out is that the con list for short-term rentals is the longest. So if you think back to that one card where I said, I've got a short-term rental and we made $180,000 gross, it comes with its own set of negatives potentially as well. And so I didn't want to hide behind that fact. But no question, with short-term and medium-term rentals, the income is better. Certainly the income is better with short-term than medium, but medium is better than long. You have more control because you don't necessarily fall under the Residential Tenancies Act, potentially. In Ontario, that can be very restrictive, I guess, if you will, for landlords. And for short-term, certainly you could potentially use it personally. For mid-term, there's less competition. Mid-term rentals are not, there's still a bit of a new asset, I guess, or a new strategy that's being used in terms of being able to make money. With long-term, the pros would be stability, potentially less management, and the fact that long-term rental, and Karen, you chime in on this, but long-term rental income can be recognized by lenders, especially major banks.
Exactly. Yeah. Lenders definitely they want long-term leases, and they're not a big fan of Airbnb income. The short-term renters don't treat the property, quite the same as a long-term person where that's their home.
Yep. The negatives, the cons. With short-term, active management absolutely is required if you want to be any good at being a short-term host. Your costs up front can be substantial if you have to do any kinds of renovations to get the property up to how you want it to appear and rent. Remember that you are basically you've become like a hotel manager for all intents and purposes, as well as furnishing the place. And getting cutlery and glassware and decorations and all that kind of stuff. There can be substantial upfront costs. Same thing with medium term. Bylaws. You have to follow bylaws. Our property is in Niagara. We went through a whole kind of thing about, what kind of rules we had to follow. We couldn't have 4 bedrooms. There's an inspection by the town. There's all kinds of different things that we have to follow. Wear and tear can be high. The more frequent you're changing people over, the property can get more dings and dents and scratches and all that kind of stuff. Karen, did you want to talk about HST and financing issues for short term?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I was just made aware since my cottage property, I Airbnb on occasion. My accountant said, do you have an HST number? I'm like, I need an HST number. Anyways, if you make a certain amount of money, I believe over 30,000, you do need to have an HST and claim that income. So it's something else to consider, and it's just an extra hassle. And in terms of financing, again, lenders don't always recognize Airbnb income because it's unstable. You don't, 1 month you might get a whole bunch. You might make a lot of money, and the next month next month you don't get any. So the lenders that do count Airbnb income typically look for a 2-year average, which you're not going to have when you first buy it. So it comes with its own issues.
Yeah, absolutely. On the HST thing, if you are, and Karen and I have excellent accounting and accountant contacts. So if you want to have a conversation with an accountant about short, medium, long term, what the consequences are, what the tax implications are, certainly we can connect you. And if you're not sure what to ask or what to research, it's small supplier. That's like the keywords to have to do with HST. It's $30,000, as Karen mentioned. Less than that, you're a small supplier. More than that, you are not a small supplier anymore. With medium term, the cons would be potentially vacancy. The idea for medium-term rental is that quite often you're looking for either somebody who needs somewhere temporarily to live while they're renovating, or they're in town temporarily for, like a research project, or, there could be any number of things where they just need to be in town for a month, 4 months, 8 months, but less than 12. And so it's a much smaller pool of renters. And so there's more likelihood that you will have some vacancy. I talked about upfront costs already. Karen, financing issues similar to short-term,
it's
correct?
Similar, yeah.
In terms of that income not necessarily being recognized. And then for me, with medium-term rental, I would say there's much more legwork. So for short-term rental, you have platforms that are excellent, like Airbnb, like VRBO, like those kinds of things. With medium-term rentals, it's a little bit tricky. There's not necessarily a dedicated, at least not that I'm aware of, a dedicated platform for midterm rentals. And really, I think for you to get the most out of your property, you have to have great connections and contacts with people at nearby hospitals, with people at schools, with the big employers in town. They need to be aware of your property as an option for people that might be coming in, flying in for a certain period of time, people staying in town. That is critical, I think, but it requires a ton of networking and a ton of legwork. Long-term rentals, we talked about the pros already. With the cons, the income relative to short and medium term often can be less. You do have tenants, which can be a huge advantage or a huge disadvantage. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Karen's got a story to share that will be of interest, I think, to everybody watching and everybody here. And responsibility. You as a landlord for long-term rental, you have certain obligations. There's one issue of like the types of tenants that you get, but then also just your role and responsibility and everything that you have to provide as a landlord according to the Residential Tenancies Act, which is specific to Ontario. Did I miss anything that you wanted to talk about?
We're good.
Okay. So those are the strategy types. And then we're going to get into the property types. And again, we're not going to be able to hit every single type of property. So we're hitting kind of major categories. And what we wanted to do was to relay what a key kind of concept or word was for each property type. So for a home, a townhome, any kind of freehold property where you're probably doing long-term, the word for me is longevity. You could also include the word stability. Basically, it's something that you're going to buy and hold long-term, probably, and have it be a very stable asset in your portfolio. For a condominium, and that could be a box in the sky, so to speak. It could be a condo townhouse, something where there's some kind of maintenance fee associated with it. If you're looking at the States, there's HOA fees, or the Homeowners Association, where they have certain things that are included as part of that fee. But certainly in Canada, I think most people are familiar with maintenance fees. The key word for that as an investment type would be easy. There's no roof to fix. There's no snow to shovel. There's no grass to cut. There's no, for most property types, if you have a townhouse, that's, then maybe. But if we're talking about condominiums in buildings, it's a much easier thing to manage. But no question that your cash flow will probably be less. For your cottage, your rural properties, things that you would probably lean towards doing short-term rentals, the key word would be income. The income can be significant for those types of properties. And so that's the good. You have to kind of think about those negatives that we talked about with the strategy type as well. And maintenance. And to give you an example, our Niagara property, we have a bug spray package.
Oh.
Because it's a rural property, we've got vineyards on two sides. We're Niagara on the lake. And that's not an expense that I have at my Hamilton rental or my Midtown Toronto condo. So there are some maintenance things that kind of come with that as well. One point I wanted to bring up. Commercial or mixed use. Admittedly, I'm licensed for it, but commercial is not my bread and butter. So it's not something that I can refer somebody to if I'm like, I really want to invest in a commercial property. Then I can connect you with somebody who is certainly much more well-versed. But the key word for commercial is control. You do not have to adhere to the Residential Tenancies Act, at least for the commercial aspect of it. If you've got an apartment upstairs or something like that, then you would. But control is huge. If a tenant doesn't pay, you can put locks on the doors. You're not necessarily going to do that day one if a tenant doesn't pay, but you cannot do that basically under any circumstances for residential, no matter how long they've paid. You have to go through the proper process. In commercial, you don't have to adhere to the Residential Tenancies Act, and so you have much more control over your property.
So as a mortgage agent, I actually have access to over 40 different lenders. So depending on the financing type, like when you're considering like a freehold home or a condo, pretty much most of my lenders have an appetite for this particular kind. So they're the easiest to finance. Pretty much with any investment that you're considering buying, investment properties typically have a 20% down payment requirement. But when you're purchasing, a free home, you can actually, if you own one already, you can actually turn it into a rental. For cottage properties, they actually require a little bit less down payment, or could, almost similar to like a residential home. But the type of property, there's two types of, let's getting back into it. So two types of vacation properties, like year-round properties, and then those that are seasonal potentially or have. So that could be really easy. So single family freehold, condos, and cottages typically are the easiest. And then, of course, commercial buildings, very few. I don't have as many lenders who have an appetite for that. So they're a little bit harder to financing, higher rates, and typically some fees involved too. But we can get into that later.
Now, Karen, we were chatting before about cottage properties, and I think you had kind of you talked about like all year round versus seasonal, but there was also something about a foundation and then also something about water, potable water. So do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, sure. For the easiest financing, the one that most of my lenders have an appetite for, they want it year round. So it has to have a heat source, right? So it's going to be usable in the winter. Also a year-round access. So it can't be an island cottage, for example, because you're not going to be able to access it. It should have like a foundation, and it's going to need potable water, so drinkable water. Doesn't mean you can't use lake water. It just means that you'll need a filtration system, and generally the lender will want some testing on that too.
Interesting. Okay, so a few more hoops to jump through, so to speak, if you're buying a rural or a cottage property in terms of water test results.
Yeah, water test results. Okay. And that's pretty much the bigger one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. We've talked about property strategies or investing strategies. We've talked about property types. And now it's about how to optimize the type of property that pairs with the type of strategy. And again, there are hundreds of different ways you can optimize, trying to hit on some of the key ones that would make sense depending on the strategy and the property type. So for me, if it's a freehold property and if it's a long-term rental, not a short-term, and probably not a medium-term either. In fact, what I'm about to say would probably be a disadvantage or a disincentive for short and medium term. But for a long-term rental, multi-unit. I don't necessarily mean 100-unit apartment building. If you can do that right away, if you're at a first investment seminar or first investment property seminar and you can buy 100-plex, you probably shouldn't be here. Hi, welcome. Come on in. Mm-hmm. And so multi-unit. So the idea is that turning something into a duplex, or maybe it already is a duplex, triplex, maybe a 4-unit if you can. Once you start getting into the 5, 6, and up, then you're kind of getting into multiplexes. It could run into, tell me if I'm wrong, commercial lending.
Yes.
Is 5 the cutoff?
With most lenders, yes.
Okay.
5
so 5 and under?
5 or 4 and under.
4 and under
is generally residential, and then anything more than 4 is typically commercial.
In terms of apartments or units within a property.
Correct.
Okay. So when I say 4 and under, it's like doors or units within a property, within a home. So buying just a single house and renting that out to one kind of family or one group, not great in terms of your ability to kind of generate income. And instead, if you can buy a single family home and then turn the basement into an apartment, or if it's a 2-story home, can you separate it so that the main floor and the second floor can have separate units? That is, I think, the way to go to get multiple units in that property. Uniqueness, I think, is really important in almost any circumstance, but certainly from a property standpoint. And this is a picture, a picture from the Niagara-on-the-Lake property that we have as a short-term rental. It is unique in the sense that it is on 1.5 acres, 1.4, I don't want to cheat, but 1.4 acres, and is surrounded by vineyards on 2 sides. That in and itself makes it unique. And so that comes inherent with the property. And so if you can find a property that has something unique to it, something that is different, if it's a long-term rental, maybe it's a really big driveway or a really great garage. It could be something like a powder room on the main floor, which is very challenging to find for certain properties. So something that is unique to the property itself is a way to optimize any kind of property that you would buy. And then I want to talk about amenities, which could be specific to the property, or it could be specific to nearby the property. So for example, using the Niagara-on-the-Lake property as well, we put a wood-burning sauna on site. That is an amenity that is unique to that property, although it's becoming less unique as more people are putting wood-burning saunas on. But we also have nearby amenities in the sense that we are close to Niagara-on-the-Lake. So people want to come and visit the wineries and those kinds of things. If you're buying a long-term rental, are you near a school? If you're doing a student rental, are you near a major hospital? If you want to identify, you want to have nurses as tenants, just as an example. Are you near transit to allow people to get to and from? So amenities are critical. Karen, do you want to talk about I'm just bringing this on you.
Yeah.
One of your properties that you bought it in a specific location because of what it had to offer in terms of a nearby amenity.
Yeah, sure. My business partner and I recently purchased a property actually in Florida. And the reason we chose it was in Kissimmee, close to Orlando. And the reason we looked there is it's close to Disneyland, but also it's considered one of the conference hubs. So, 3-bedroom homes in that area are pretty marketable. And, people like to come, they bring their families, like it's, they're there for a conference, but the family can go to Disneyland. And so it kind of has a little bit of everything and good weather.
Good
for Canadians.
Good for you. I didn't know that about the conference thing. So that's smart. So you're guaranteeing turnover, right? Like, which is great because the more frequent the turnover, yes, you could run into vacancy issues, but you also typically get higher income as well, right? So finishes can be very important. Now, this obviously is a lovely kitchen, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that you would take a rental and turn it into like a luxury property necessarily. But when I look at, let's say, rentals in Toronto, just as an example, and I go into one that has, the kitchen hasn't been updated in 25 years and it hasn't been painted in a long time, and there's still carpet on the ground, on the floor, and all those kinds of things, versus similar location, similar size, but they have quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances and hardwood or engineered hardwood throughout, not crazy expensive finishes and upgrades. The difference in rent can be substantial. And not only that, but the amount of time that it takes to rent out the property, the amount of vacancy, those things can matter a lot. So again, you don't have to do gold-plated whatever, but can you find a fairly cost-efficient way to make your property attractive? That works for short-term rentals, that works for medium-term rentals, that works for long-term rentals. Commercial, again, I'm not as familiar, but I would imagine that yes, that would make sense for commercial as well. So make sure that you don't ignore finishes. And the idea is that with all of these types of optimizations, and obviously there's a lot more, but buying a property that either already has these things in place, and you would pay for that, obviously, but if you want it to be a little bit more hands-off, if you want it to be a little bit easier of a purchase, less kind of work that you put into it and whatnot, you can buy a property that has these things going for it, or you can put them in yourself. And by yourself, I mean, you could hire a contractor or whatever. But the wood-burning sauna, the Niagara place didn't have it. We bought a hot tub literally 3 days ago. It's going in soon for anybody who's watching it and wants to rent the property. So you can add these types of things, but you can't add the vineyards next door. You can't add the subway stop next door. You can't add the fact that it's a conference hub, or that Disney World is nearby. So you have to be mindful of these things. What can I control? What can I not control in terms of optimizations? How can I make the property better? What's already in place that makes the property great? Okay. Next is talking about where to buy. I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation that a lot of what we're talking about is really identifying what strategy makes sense for you and what are your goals. How hands-on or hands-off do you want to be? How hands-on or hands-off can you be realistically? How comfortable are you even with buying a property that's far away? Are you going to travel and go and see it? Karen, just as an example, your Florida property. Did you travel to Florida and go and see it before you purchased it?
I did, actually. Yeah.
Good for you. Not everybody would do that. And I'm not saying this as a bragging point, but the Niagara property that we bought, we did not see it before we bought it. We did have very trusted partners who went to go see the property on our behalf. They took all kinds of videos and walked through, and we talked about what the potential could be. So we had connection to people who we trusted, who were kind of making that decision about whether the property was right or not. But you, the viewers, you, the attendees, need to consider, what is my strategy? What are my goals? What's realistic for me? Those things will really feed into where should I be buying? Because it might be I have to buy within an hour from where I live. Or it could be I'm totally fine buying in another country. Right? It'll depend. For me, where to buy, and I will, for those of you who are here and watching, I will be getting to very specific locations because I know that's probably what you want. Like, what's the next best kind of place to buy in Ontario? Just as an example. But before we get to that, I want to talk about location in terms of macro and micro, because really, to me, there are two buckets. There's your macro in terms of like, what is your general location? So is it going to be a city or a town? Is it going to be lakefront or rural? And is it going to be out of province or out of country? You own an out of country property. You also own an out of province country as well. Out of province property. And so you have to think about what your general areas are. And that will very much tie into your strategy. When you bought the Florida property, what was your thinking in terms of how it connected to what your strategy was going to be?
Well, at the time, honestly, house prices were really, really expensive in Ontario. So we were kind of looking for positive cash flow, which was hard to find here. So hence we were looking outside.
Okay. And the Florida property, was it something that you felt like you were maybe going to use yourself, or is this strictly an investment, 12 months a year, I'm not touching it?
For me personally, I don't have kids. It was strictly an investment. Short-term rentals, they allow those there, and it's the tax breaks are a lot less. So even though the cash flow may not be as great, the tax incentives sometimes in the States are are very attractive.
Interesting. Okay. Karen is also offended half the audience. You don't have to have kids to be a Disney lover.
That's true. That's true.
Right?
In all honesty, I've never been.
Oh, wow. Deprived.
It's true.
So you have to think about your general locations in terms of your strategy and what makes sense in terms of your comfort as well. Not everyone would be comfortable buying a property in Florida when they're living in, southern GTA or whatever the case is. And then your micro locations. So sure, I've identified that I want to buy a property in Kingston, Ontario, or buy a property in Calgary, or buy a property in Costa Rica or Florida as an example. But then where in Costa Rica, where in Kingston, where in Calgary, just as an example. And that gets back to the optimizations and the strategy as well. Because you might buy a property within Kingston, and if you want to do a student rental, you probably should be either near Queen's University or on a bus line that goes straight to Queen's University. If you don't want to have a student rental, but you want to buy in Kingston for other reasons, then you want to be near transit that would get downtown or transit to a major employer or whatever the case is. So you have to think about, I'm going to buy in Vancouver, but then where in Vancouver, just as an example. So access to downtown, access to transit. If it's a short-term rental, do you want to be on a popular lake? It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to buy in the Kawarthas, but where in the Kawarthas? Is there a particular beach that is very popular? Costa Rica, there's a number of different sections where some are very quiet and very remote, some beaches, and some beaches are where everybody goes when they travel. So you have to be mindful of that. Is it near university, or do you need it to be near university, big employer, hospital? Again, depending on all those different things. Okay. We obviously can't identify every possible kind of place that we think is that kind of next great place. And there's going to be a lot of places on here that you're like, okay, I already know that one. I don't know that I'm going to be identifying anything that you may not have heard of or thought of or whatever the case is. But try to make a Venn diagram where identified some locations that were good for cash flow, some that were good for appreciation, some that might be good for a mix of the two. If we're talking about Ontario, I would say any place in Ontario for the most part should be in this middle part. Okay, should be in that middle section, because real estate has completely boomed in Ontario and a lot of places in North America, I would say, in the last couple of years. So I'm thinking more pre-pandemic, during what I would call normal times, where markets historically have been good for one thing or another, or maybe both. Okay. Certainly for cash flow, university towns. A new one that may be not on your radar necessarily, that a lot of people have been talking about over the past couple of years because of maybe being pushed out of the GTA and even like just outside of the GTA with prices, is Sudbury. Another one is Windsor, which is at the top of the Venn diagram there. Cornwall is another one. Those places, for one reason or another, have been great for cash flow. And they continue to do that, although the prices have gone up, and it certainly has reduced the cash flow to a degree. Wine country, so Niagara-on-the-Lake, Prince Edward County, and an area that I'm going to put on your radar. This is my opinion, my theory, in terms of what I think that maybe the next Niagara-on-the-Lake is. Because Prince Edward County, I think, is already kind of getting there. For anybody who is familiar with Prince Edward County, which is out near Belleville, it's very expensive now. Very expensive. And they also now have very restrictive bylaws. They're going through some stuff, kind of figuring out what makes sense for Prince Edward County in terms of short-term rentals. But Prince Edward County, from a price standpoint, has gotten expensive. Norfolk County, which is Long Point, Turkey Point, are a couple of provincial park areas. This is down on Lake Erie, so this is to the west. On the coast of Lake Erie. If you look up Norfolk County, there are wineries and breweries and stuff like that springing up all over the place. It's probably, I don't know if it's 10 years behind Prince Edward County, but it's maybe kind of 5 to 7 years behind Prince Edward County. So if you were to buy a place now in Norfolk County looking for that Niagara on the Lake or Prince Edward County income, it's not there. But I think it could be because you have a lot of other things going for it as well. So that's one to put on your radar that I didn't put on here, but would fit under the wine country category. London now, not just for schools, but it's become like a similar category as Barrie, as Oshawa, maybe as Hamilton. Welland, St. Catharines are areas down in that Niagara on the Lake that are good for cash flow, historically haven't been great for appreciation, are getting better, but that's another kind of area down that way, Thorold, those kinds of places, and have been good for short-term rentals as well. Crystal Beach, just as an example, Niagara Falls. Florida. Tons of Canadians, especially Ontarians, are going to Florida and have been for a long time in terms of like, we think about snowbirds, but now people are starting to invest in a place like Florida as well. I think I hit everything on the cash flow side. Yes. Okay. On the appreciation side, and I would say almost strictly appreciation. That doesn't mean that it's not going to work from a rental perspective, but you've had pretty good appreciation. They tend to be more affluent areas. Oakville, Burlington, Aurora, King City, those are examples of places that tend to draw people with wealth and money. And so if you had a property that was there, it might be a single family rental. But if you can deal with it either just breaking even or maybe cash flowing negative, but after 5 years, you've made hundreds of thousands of dollars on appreciation, that might make you feel a lot better about cash flowing negative $500 a month or $700 a month or something like that. So keep in mind that, again, strategy, location, all that kind of stuff. Also, you have to consider what you want from your property. Lastly, where to buy in terms of that nice middle where you might get a nice mix. Toronto, no question. Hamilton has been great, but I would say only in the last 6 to 7 years. We bought our Hamilton property in 2016. We were able to get it for a pretty good price. Since then, our place has probably almost tripled in about 7 years. Ottawa, Barrie, Mississauga, another city. Are there more? Yes. I only had so much room on the Venn diagram. Okay. Any that come to mind for you, Karen, that I haven't hit on in terms of locations?
No, I mean, I think you can just see GTA, a lot of GTA there. And, as the combination, I think
Your property is in, one of your properties you have is in Quebec?
Yes.
Okay. And why did you buy there?
So that particular property, honestly, I was looking for a cottage a little getaway when, it was too expensive. Everything was like high price. And Quebec, I had actually treated myself to a birthday getaway in Mont-Tremblant. Fell in love with the area. And so I'm like, hey, why not? Tremblant area has a lot of like small little lakes. So I was thinking, hey, if I can find something that I can use for myself close to Tremblant, but also on a lake, I can pretty much find, when I'm not using it, find renters year round. So multi-use.
Very good. So just to reiterate, and I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, but where you should buy is heavily dependent on what your goals and your strategies are. If you want to make income, if you want to supplement your income, if you want to eventually replace your income, if you're a T4 employee or something like that, you want to replace it with real estate income, then that will largely determine where you're going to look. This is all you. So I'm going to take a step back for a little bit and let you do your thing.
So there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to pre-approvals and rate holds. There's a lot of like websites, you can punch in numbers and you spits out a lovely like, oh, you're pre-approved. Really, I mean, what a pre-approval is, it's not really doing anything. It's only as good as the information you input. For example, someone who's self-employed, they may have made gross income last year of, 200,000. That's amazing. Yet their net is maybe they're only claiming, 50,000 on paper. Guess what? That pre-approval, because the pre-approval is using the 200,000 income. They're saying you're qualifying for this great property, but when it actually comes to you buying, the banks are going to say, it's no. So you really do need, there's very few lenders out there that actually what we call underwrite. And when I say underwrite, they're actually verifying your income, verifying your credit, verifying the source of the down payment. And just between like a rate hold and underwrite, when you're to come to pre-approval, keep in mind at all times, the lenders have no idea what kind of property that you're buying. So that's always the unknown. So all of a sudden you could be, perfect, for perfect client, great income, great credit, etc. You end up buying a hobby farm. And guess what? The lender doesn't like lending on hobby farms. So guess what? You're not really pre-approved. So it's really important to talk to like an agent like myself, and there's good ones out there. There's, like I said, I work with over 40 different lenders. They all have different criteria. So I know that, depending on which type of property that you're looking to purchase, I know which lender to look for. And, I can talk to you about those programs and make sure that you're actually qualified and all the I's and T's are dotted. I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Just to reiterate, I'm pre-approving you as a borrower, but not the property itself. So generally when my clients come to me and, you kind of know your strategies, I ask you to, send me some properties that you're interested in. So I kind of have an idea of what you're looking at. So I can give you some rough numbers. Because, as Jamie mentioned, there's tons of different properties, locations, etc., strategies. Before getting a pre-approval, you should have an idea what those strategies are. What type of property are you looking to buy? Are you looking to buy, a single family home and maybe a basement apartment? Are you looking to buy that rental property, a cottage or a vacation home or a commercial property? Each of these properties have different lenders and different down payment requirements. So, we should know kind of what type that you're interested in buying. And income, there's two income. You should know approximately like how much income that property is going to generate. You can sources, a good realtor, but also, you can go to rentals.ca or, there's lots of websites to get a rough idea. Hey, if you buy, like, for example, I have a rental property in Hamilton. It has 3 bedrooms. You can generally put, generally vicinity, 3 bedrooms, and get a rough idea of what you think the rents would generate for that particular property. Taxes, we're talking about property taxes. Different areas in Ontario, the property taxes on properties can vary quite greatly. So, qualifying for something where taxes are like 1,000 versus a home where the taxes, especially for commercial properties, can be upwards of 10 and 15,000, can affect how much you qualify for, because it's a big expense. And then down payment, you need to know how much down payment you have available to you. Most rental or investment properties require 20%. So you need to know where is that coming from. I think there's the next slide. Yeah. Speaking of down payment, there's different ways to come up with it. Obviously, you could just have your own sources like savings, etc. You could be borrowing it. So some people are sitting on large line of credit. But keep in mind, I need to know, where is that down payment coming from? Because if you are going to be using funds from borrowed sources, we now have to factor in another payment, right? So, and different lenders will treat, depending on where that the borrowed funds are coming from, they treat a different expense into the application. So a HELOC home equity line of credit, in case you're wondering what that is treated, the minimum down payments for qualifying are very different than a loan, for example, where we can actually use the payment itself. If you're using RSPs, that's great. Something to keep in mind, if you're not a first-time home buyer and it doesn't qualify for investment properties anyways, let's just say you have $100,000 in your RSPs, but you want to use it. The banks are not going to give you that $100,000. There's actually withholding tax, and they keep it at source. So if you're withdrawing, you want to access that $100,000, you're really only going to get $80,000 until you do your income taxes, and they'll give you the difference. And then other people's money. Some people will, if they don't qualify themselves, you can, maybe a buddy or a family member. Maybe an immediate family member is gifting you some money, which maybe you're lucky enough to have one of those. But who and, how they're contributing makes a big difference in terms of financing as well. If it's just mom or dad giving you some money, great. For the most part, it's just easy peasy. When buying an investment property, the lenders do want to see some of your own money being used. So you're going to need some of your own money. And also, if it's just a buddy or an investor, then, we can look into, the lenders may want that person on title. And also they may consider it, even though they're giving you the money, they may count it as a loan, the lender. So I need to know that up front so that we can really give you a true underwritten, pre-approval, pre-qualification.
A couple of quick points, if I can kind of add on to that. Yeah. So the HELOC thing, the home equity line of credit, bought my first investment property, which was the Hamilton rental, using funds on a home equity line of credit. Bought the Niagara investment property using funds on a different home equity line of credit. So it can be a massive tool that you can use to help you acquire properties. The other thing about OPM or other people's money, you may be here, you may be at home watching or here thinking, well, I don't have the funds to kind of buy property. The Niagara property, as an example, we actually own it in a partnership. My wife and I were what we call the capital partners. The people that have a now 50% interest, both in equity and in the cash flow, did not put any money into the deal. They are the management partners. They sourced the property. They went to go look at it. They did a lot of work in terms of like coming up with projections about how the property was going to cash flow and all that kind of stuff. And then once we acquire the property, they do everything from a management standpoint. So they provide their management services. So if you have something that you can provide as value to somebody who has money, but doesn't have the ability to manage it or source it or anything like that, that can be a way for you to get into the deal without actually injecting any of your own money. And I am proof of that at least on one side of things, right? Like it's the other people who did not have to put any money into the deal. And just to clarify, they get 50% of all the cash flow and 50% of all the equity in the property. And they didn't put any money into it. Now, they don't get that 50% equity until we refinance or sell or something like that. But certainly they get 50% of the cash flow. Mm-hmm. And again, they are receiving that because of the services that they provided. But up front, they provided no money. Now, for those of you who are thinking, wait a second, we probably had the down payment and we had money that we had put into furnishings and that kind of stuff. We've structured the agreement so that we get all that. If and when we go to sell, my wife and I would receive that money back. And then the difference, kind of what's left over, that would be split 50-50. Okay. Just to kind of let you know how that can be structured and how that can work. Okay. How to manage. I am kind of living testament that being self-managing a property, even from a little bit of a distance, does not have to be a burden. It does not have to be something that should scare you away from buying a property that's not down the street from you. I have not been to my Hamilton property in about a year. And I'll tell you kind of how we do that, but it is not all tenants and toilets. So I don't want anybody who is watching this to think, well, I can't buy a place in St. Catharines or Welland or whatever because I live in Toronto and I don't want to get that phone call, oh, the toilet's backed up and you got to jump in your car. And like, I don't do that, right? I tell them to call a plumber. I pay the bill. They arrange the emergency visit by the plumber, whatever it is that's needed. But that's kind of how I manage at least that aspect from afar. I don't go there to shovel the driveway or to salt or anything like that, but that stuff is taken care of for our tenants because we have set up a property management agreement with one of our tenants. They're not a professional property manager. We just ask them we pay them to make sure that everything is salted, everything is shoveled, grass is cut, hedges are trimmed, leaves are raked, those kinds of things, a lot of outdoor kind of property management. And we pay them a certain fee per month. And it's a set amount all the time. That agreement, and this is a very key point, you can hire a tenant, but do not discount the rent. Don't say, okay, well, your rent is $2,000 a month. This is worth $250 a month. So you pay $1,750. Do not do that. They pay you $2,000. You pay them $250. Okay. Because if they are not doing their job, you are still receiving the rent. Okay. Because the landlord tenant board, if you tried to kind of take that to tribunal, they'll look at, well, what is their rental amount? Right. You're giving them a discount. And then that other part becomes a civil matter, whatever. Anyway, point being, do not just discount your rent, have separate agreements. Okay, very key. But you can self-manage. We'll talk about your story in 2 slides, I think. You can also hire property management. I think it should be for good property management for a long-term rental, probably around 10% of your gross income. Okay. Can you find less? Yes. Can you find more? Yes. Can you find less, but they provide less services? Sure. So if you don't need them to collect rent for you, if you don't need them to kind of do certain things, then you could get less than 10%. If you're talking about management of a short-term rental or a medium-term rental, it's probably going to be 20% of your gross income. That's a ballpark. Some are 25, some might be a little bit less, but 20% I think is a pretty good estimate. I'm obviously biased, okay? But to give you an idea, my Hamilton property as an example, I hire realtors or a realtor to find us new tenants when there is tenant turnover. I don't do it myself necessarily, although I can and capable, but I'm not just able to kind of make that distance or that trek or whatever. So we pay 1 month's rent plus tax for a realtor to market the property, to conduct showings, to communicate with other realtors who are showing the property, blah, blah, blah. We leverage experts for things that happen infrequently, like tenant turnover. Okay. Ideally, it's not happening every single year. Then your cash flow kind of gets eaten into a little bit. But I have zero problem kind of leveraging that aspect of it.
Oh, you want to talk about my story?
Yes, Karen's got a story that she's going to share with you.
My brother and I actually bought the first couple properties that is how I got into it, using some other people's money. And some of those properties, we found the tenants ourselves, and it's great. I purchased a Hamilton property as well. It's single family with a basement unit. And, I had all the time in the world, was going to do all the due diligence. And then I had a bunch of personal things happen and all hell broke loose. And let's just say, I just wanted to get a tenant in, and get it off my plate. And I didn't do my due diligence at that time. I said, it was a guy with 3 dogs. It was one disclosed dog. How could a guy with a dog, be so bad? Anyways, a year later, after him not paying rent for an entire year and being a hoarder to boot, I finally got him out. But I would say all in all, just because he caused havoc to the upstairs unit as well, was about a $20,000 mistake. So, you don't have the time, or don't have time to do that due diligence. It really is worth, hiring a professional, getting them to do due diligence, doing the background, calling those references, making sure they're real and their phone numbers are intact is it's worth it.
Yeah. Whether you hire a realtor, whether you hire a property manager to just kind of do that tenant search for you, it's probably going to be a 1 month's rent charge. So whatever the rental amount will be is what you pay. So a $20,000 kind of year long versus $1,500 or whatever it's been. I mean, now, are you guaranteed that you're going to have a $20,000 mistake? No, right? And could you still get the $20,000 mistake if you hire a professional? Sure, that could happen, but the likelihood is less, right? So leverage experts for infrequent events is a great way to manage from a distance. This is the last section, which is great because we're right at 3:00, and then wanted to leave it open for a Q&A if people have questions. I have learned a lot through various resources. Karen, I know that you are an avid kind of learner as well, lifelong learner. There are some books that I've read that have been fantastic. There are podcasts that I listen to that have provided a ton of value and continue to do so. I've got some other things that I'll talk about in a minute. But if you have not read Rich Dad Poor Dad, that is probably the single biggest book that everybody talks about in terms of being an influence on them and their kind of mindset on assets and value and,
and using other people's money.
Yes. One that I don't have on here that is good, not necessarily real estate focused, but I think is a very easy read that is great about money and money habits and that kind of stuff is The Wealthy Barber. David Chilton, I believe, is the author of that. Highly recommend that book, but that's not a real estate focused book. Don Campbell, you can see on screen, Don R. Campbell is kind of like the real estate in Canada godfather, I guess, if you will. He's written tons of books. I believe he's the founder of REIN, REIN, which is the Real Estate Investment Network, which is like a community that you can kind of be a part of and that kind of stuff. But a lot of books that you can read by Don Campbell would be a fabulous resource of information. And I'm going to talk about how to identify different locations and stuff like that using a resource of Don Campbell's. But that book specifically, Real Estate Investing in Canada, Creating Wealth with the ACRE System, ACRE, is a great read and not a hard read either. I was really impressed. I don't think this is as well known, but I got this one from the library a few years ago. It's by Peter Kinch. It's called The Canadian Real Estate Action Plan. He is an investment-focused mortgage broker. I passed that book on to you actually a number of years ago. You don't have to tell me whether you read it or not, but I thought it was fantastic. So I'd highly recommend that, and I don't think a lot of people know about that book. Resources. I listen to podcasts a lot. These are 4 podcasts, and I don't have any personal relationships with these people. I don't get anything from kind of pushing their stuff. I think that they provide a ton of value. That's Erwin Zito. He's based out of Hamilton, and he's got a show called The Truth About Real Estate Investing for Canadians. They also do a little bit of other investment stuff like stock options and stock option trading and those kinds of things, but it's mostly real estate focused. Sarah Larby is on the right side. She's got Where Should I Invest? And she's also one of the leaders of something called the REITE Club, REITE, which is the real estate investment. I totally forget what the T and the E stand for, but they do stand for something. Anyway, Where Should I Invest is a very good podcast. I find there's a lot of overlap between this one and the REITE Club podcast because she's involved with both. But they do an okay job of not overlapping too much. Andrew Hines is another guy who's got a very good podcast, and I've got a resource from him that I'll share with you in a moment. And then there's Sandy McKay and Rob. I forget Rob's last name, but I don't know him personally, and he's never going to see this, so it's not a problem. But the Breakthrough REI podcast, Breakthrough Real Estate Investing podcast, is quite good as well. So those are those resources that I would recommend. I have one app that I would recommend. It's the Canadian Mortgage app. It does a fantastic job of, I'm sure you could get like a pre-approval through it and stuff like that, but I would not recommend that. You would call Karen or contact Karen. But if you want to very quickly analyze a property, if you know the numbers, this app includes everything all in it. So you put in the purchase price, you put in what your down payment is going to be, you put in what you think your estimates are going to be for, your expenses, your heat, your hydro, all those kinds of things, unless you're kind of pushing that off. You can insert your property taxes, you can include your rental amount monthly, and then it'll spit out a number for you and say, like, here's what your net cash flow is, positive, negative, neutral, whatever the case is. It will also, in a separate part of the app, tell you what your land transfer tax is going to be, and it'll give you a rough idea as to what your closing costs are going to be as well. So I'm a big fan of this app. You can do a lot of stuff in one with that. Karen, mortgage brokers, Jamie, real estate agents, use them. When I bought my Hamilton place, I used a realtor. When I bought my Niagara place, I used a realtor. I am a realtor. Could I have gone and done it myself? Sure, I could have, but I don't know Hamilton that well. I don't know Niagara on the Lake that well. So leverage those experts. Okay. Do you pay for it? Yes. Do I think it's worth it? Absolutely. Okay. The one thing that I would say, Karen is great because Karen, your license is correct me if I'm wrong, Ontario for sure. Canada?
I'm licensed in Ontario, but I work as part of a big network, so I do have access to lend anywhere in Canada. Yeah.
And for myself, I'm licensed in Ontario, but I don't really help anybody outside of the Toronto area. So if you are identifying Hamilton or Kingston or Costa Rica, California, it doesn't matter. I've got contacts all over the place that I can connect you with. And I think it's crucial that you work with and get connected with an investment-focused mortgage broker, somebody who's got investments, an investment-focused realtor, somebody who's got investments themselves as well, and know the ins and outs. If you're going to buy a short-term rental in Niagara on the Lake like I did, work with a realtor who knows about the bylaws, who knows about what you can and can't do with that property, who could maybe give you some projections. We had those from our property managers as well going into it. But I just can't stress enough how you should form relationships with somebody who's an expert in the area that you've identified to possibly buy in. And you can look at multiple places at once, right? But you're not going to be with the same realtor for Guelph as you would for London, Ontario, just as an example. Okay, they're going to be too far apart. Some other resources that I wanted to, I'll get to that in a second. Some other resources that I can share with you, and please send me an email, and my contact information is going to be on the next slide. I have a cash flow analyzer that I got from Andrew Hines, which is great. I use it myself. It's fantastic. So it's just an Excel spreadsheet. I can send it to you. I didn't make it, so I don't want to take credit for it. I've got a second suite kind of checklist. So like buying a place that's got a basement apartment, you have to adhere to like local code, but there's also Ontario building code. And I've got a checklist for all those things. Again, I didn't make it. I got it from, I don't even remember now. I wish I could give credit. I read one of Don Campbell's books and then I was reading it in paper. I took one of the like property analyzer forms and just created it digitally. I have a copy of that. Happy to give it to you. And then I also I read these 3 books. I made notes specifically on the Canadian Real Estate Action Plan and the acre system. I read this a long time ago and I didn't really make notes on it. But if you want my notes that I made, and they're my notes, so I don't know if it would be like too weird or too personal, but it's a pretty good summary and overview. Happy to share it with you. So I'm happy to pass those things along. So take down my contact information, please. Take down Karen's contact information. The other thing that I'll ask, I'll be a little bit selfish here. And Karen, I'll invite you to do the same, although I don't know that you are as active on socials, correct?
Not really. Yeah.
Okay. She's too busy doing deals. So
being shy.
she's also shy. Give me a follow on Instagram, if you will. I put out lots of info that's great for, I'm going to start putting out more investor-focused information, but certainly from a real estate perspective, I put stuff out there. And same thing with YouTube. If you'd be willing to subscribe to my channel, I would be very appreciative and very grateful. Like I said, Karen is too busy doing lots of business. Hit her up on email. Email's best for you?
Yeah, email. Yeah, that's probably best.
Probably best.
Yeah.
But Karen is not afraid to pick up the phone.
Yeah, you can call me.
So if you do call her,
anytime.
she will answer as well. And that's it.
Perfect.
So I want to thank you for coming.
Yeah,
I want to thank you for watching. And we've got a little bit of time that I'm happy to kind of open it up to questions. And I'm looking at my video guy. I don't know if he can hear me. Yes. Are people have people asking questions and stuff like that? Okay, cool.
We'll do the last. You want to do the in person?
Okay. Great. Fantastic. Do any of you have any questions? And if you do, I'd ask if you don't mind, there's a microphone over here so that people who are watching at home could also hear. And it's okay if you're going to be shy as well, because we're not going anywhere after. And if you prefer to approach us one-on-one, that's fine afterwards as well.
I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Karen is despite being up here, is a little bit shy and would not be getting up to go to a microphone to ask questions afterwards. Cool.
Sure.
Okay. So we've got a couple of live questions. Hope to God I'll be able to answer them.
So, first one is, can we consider vacation home and purchase it at less than 20% down if you already own property?
The answer is yes. We're not actually using any rental income in those properties. If you're going to be designating as even a second home, you can put less than 20%. Or if you intend to occupy it as your primary residence and then use that vacation, you would be subject to the default insurance. A company like the CMHC, Sagen, or Canada Guarantee. But yes, it's definitely possible.
And if I can reiterate a great point that Karen made much earlier in the presentation, let's say you're living in a place. If you were going to buy another property and make that your primary residence, and then convert the one that you were living in into a multi-unit, that's a way to avoid or escape the 20% down payment.
You got it. Because
that new one is going to be your primary residence. What I'll say, and what you know as well, is that that's only for properties under the $1 million mark.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, any property over $1 million will still require that 20%.
No matter
down
what,
payment. Yeah.
Whether it's your primary residence, whether an investment property, you must put 20% down if it's $1 million or more. And a number of years ago, that might not have been as much of an issue, but with the way prices have gone in the last little while, it would not be hard to find a cottage or something like that over $1 million. So you do have to just kind of keep that in mind as far as the percentages and stuff like that. Yeah. Next.
Okay, so the next question is, what's the down payment requirement for the vacation home, given that you currently own a primary residence?
Same thing as under 20. It's really going to depend if it's a vacation property, the type of property. So I might have mentioned like a type A property, whether it's year round. Does it have a heat source? Does it have potable water? Or is it an island property where you have to, take a boat, which is not year round? Those year round, kind of like a home like that has all the amenities, you can put as little right now as 5%. Whereas those B type properties, the seasonal properties, ones that, don't have those, permanent heat sources or water, will require 10% or more.
Now, I may be learning something new here, so I'm going to chime in with my own question.
Sure.
So I own a house here. I want to buy a cottage property. Mm-hmm. Even though it's a second property, I do not have to put 20% down?
That is correct.
Now, what if I want to buy it strictly as an investment?
Then you are now subject to the 20% or more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like cutting off the question, but I have another question I think that'll be relevant for the line of questioning that we're getting here. What if I'm buying a rural or a cottage property and I'm going to use it sometimes personally and rent it out sometimes? Is that a gray area?
It is a little gray. Typically, the lenders, when you're putting smaller down payments, the lenders want to know that it's not going to be rented out. They may require that you sign something at the lawyer's office indicating that you don't intend to rent it out at all.
Like an affidavit.
Right? An affidavit.
Okay.
So you're going to be swearing to that. So keep that in mind. But typically, if you haven't, the lender's eyes, if you are intending to rent it out at all, then technically it would be considered in their eyes an investment property with the 20% down requirement.
And lenders may occasionally peruse Airbnb. So if you sign an affidavit saying that you will not, and then they see your place,
then
that's a problem.
They can potentially recall that loan or raise the interest rates, etc.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're getting smarter.
As my parents told me, honesty is the best policy growing up, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was the name of the app?
The Canadian Mortgage app. It's the logo is that greenhouse See it on the right. That's the, like when you go to the Play Store or the Google Play, whatever the case is, that's the logo for the app, Canadian Mortgage App. It's great.
Okay, next
You can-
question.
Yep. Sorry. I was going to say you can also email me. Part of my pre-qualify app is using that system, so I can send them the link to mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Cool. Okay. Very good.
Great. Do you recommend purchasing your rental properties under a corporation or personally?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And it's complicated, even though in some instances, you can put the properties into a corporation name, typically a holding company. So not an active corporation. One's just literally holding that property. Still have the same, underwriting. They still use your personal income to qualify. So it's not going to make it easier for you. And not all lenders have that as an option. And what used to be a really great benefit of doing this is to avoid, let's just say you want to buy several investment properties. If it's in the corporation name, then when you apply for something personally, then, the lenders don't really see those other properties. So it's easier to qualify. However, lenders are now, because you have to give a personal guarantee for these corporations, it's now reporting on your credit bureau. Mortgages now, in the past, they didn't used to report on credit bureaus, but now mortgages are reporting. So lenders are seeing that you have personally guaranteed that mortgage and are still including in the application. So there's less of a benefit, but there's also tax implications. So we can refer you to a great accountant for those questions.
For what it's worth, between my wife and I, we own 4 properties. And I am also, because I'm a realtor, we've been able to incorporate as of 2021, late 2021. We don't own any of them in a corporation. If we get to a certain size portfolio, then it's been recommended by a few different accountants that yes, you would try to move those properties into a corp, and then future properties you would acquire under a corp. But, for somebody who's got 4 or 5, whatever the case is, it's not, because as Karen said, you still have to qualify personally. Really what it does is it mitigates risk when it comes to, litigation and that kind of stuff, right? So it separates personal from, but that, from what I can tell, for me, is the biggest advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like I need that. I need to find some wood to knock on real fast. Do we have a few more questions?
One more.
Okay, cool. Okay.
How did you deal with getting your properties insured?
Oh,
another great contact that we have would be working with a great insurance broker.
mm-hmm.
They're getting a property insured shouldn't be difficult unless there's something going on. So like I'll speak to a long-term rental or like a city type property. If there's knob and tube or some type of plumbing that an insurance company doesn't want in there or something like that, then you might kind of run into issues. But like a typical property for a rental, you just tell them that it's going to be a rental. You'll pay slightly higher rates, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
I don't know, Karen, can you speak to, because you've got that Quebec property, insuring something that is more of a, I don't want to call it seasonal rental because I think yours places all year round,
mm-hmm.
but something that is a vacation type property. Did you run into any insurance issues?
No, at the time, I didn't intend to necessarily rent it out. But yeah, it just has regular coverage. And yeah, that's something that you do have to, as your, usage of a certain property changes, then you should really speak to the insurance broker or agent again to let them know so they can update your policy.
I don't know if that person further clarified because they were having certain issues or anything like that in the comments, but
nope.
No? Okay. Good. Great insurance broker.
Yeah.
Work with them. They'll be able to help you. Yep.
Next question.
Okay.
Can the vacation home be purchased in the same city as your primary residence?
Yeah, absolutely. We call them, we don't really call them vacation properties. In the lenders, we call them secondary homes. So these are properties that you tend to use. Sometimes you might live in Barrie, but you have a condo that you use for personal use in Toronto because it's closer to your office. Or also it could be, maybe you bought a property for your child going to university, or a relative that's going to be staying there on a rent-free basis. But location doesn't really matter. It's more the use, like what's the intended use.
So if I lived in, I'm trying to think of an example. Like if I lived in Toronto, but I lived in North Toronto, and let's say I had Blue Jays seasons tickets, and I wanted to go to every possible Blue Jays game that I could, and I was fortunate enough to have the resources to buy let's say a condo right next to the Dome. No, as far as you know, no concerns in terms of
No,
financing.
there shouldn't be a concern. However, I mean, lenders, when they underwrite, I mean, they're always looking for the story. Does it make sense? I mean, are you really buying it for your own use, or, are you buying it to avoid the 20% and you're really, and your intention is to rent it out? They might be a little more due diligent and, following up and seeing it if it ends up on, any of the rental sites.
Honesty is the best policy. Anything else?
Yeah, we have another one.
Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll kind of wrap things up.
Great. You mentioned Sudbury. Is North Bay also a good option for cash flow?
Yeah, so from what I've been hearing, again, I'm not super familiar with the North Bay example, but North Bay and Thunder Bay, if we want to talk about the bays, I've been hearing are good for cash flow. My take on places like that is that you have to be really confident about again, it would depend on your strategy, but like if and when the market ever goes bad, either from a rental standpoint or just a housing market in general standpoint, will those places hold up? I really like, if it's a long-term rental, cities that kind of have more going on than a North Bay. Just as an example, North Bay, no offense if anybody's watching from North Bay, but like the number of employers that serve North Bay, the number of schools that serve North Bay, like it's just a lot less, right? I would, obviously the purchase price is a lot less as well. There's a reason for that, right? It's because it's for those reasons. So, if you have the ability to go to North Bay, but you could also maybe do, Sudbury would maybe be a little bit of a kind of a higher market. One more minute. Okay. So yes, North Bay, yes, Thunder Bay. Just be careful and make sure that it's the right market that makes sense for you. So want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I hope you had value.
Yeah.
Hit us up if you have any questions, if you want any of those resources that I have. Happy to help.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.